Welcome to our special snow day presentation of the cardiovascular system. And I always enjoy it when difficult decisions are made for me because all day yesterday I kept thinking, move the test, don't move the test, move the test, because I just had a feeling with students coming, many of you from some far away and from different areas, inevitably there would be one area where the roads were really bad and other areas where the roads were fine. But again, I enjoy when difficult decisions are made for me. But I really wanted you to listen to this recording because it's going to really tie in with what we're doing in lab, and it'll help you get ready for the lab exam, which is next week along with when the lecture exam is. So that's the bad news. The bad news, we'll have 2 tests in 1 week because ideally I always try to keep them separated. But all right. So first thing we're going to go over, so we're beginning after the learning module, which kind of covers the structure of the heart. So we're on the class lecture portion. I have it on page 3-ish, because I always update the handouts and then my page numbers may be slightly different, but somewhere around page 3, it should say class lecture, and it's showing blood flow through the heart. Okay, a lot of this we already went over lab, so I said this is a really good reinforcement to lab. So always starting from the right side and moving to the left. Oxygen poor blood, or the other term that's used is deoxygenated, that returns to the right atrium from 3 different sources: the superior vena cava, sorry, like congestion, which drains, drains blood from the arms, the shoulders, the head and neck. Inferior vena cava, I'm missing a cava there, which is draining blood from anything below the heart. And the coronary circulation itself, the vessels that are delivering oxygen and picking up carbon dioxide to the myocardium and other tissues that make up the heart, all drain back into the coronary sinus. So just think coronary always means pertaining to the heart. Sinus just means a wider or dilated area, and you can see that on the posterior aspect of the heart model. Right, so the right atrium is going to contract. So the right atrium is filling. When the pressure in the right atrium becomes greater than that of the right ventricle, that's going to force the AV valves open. The right atrioventricular or tricuspid valve open, and then the right atrium is going to contract. So right blood's going to go into the right ventricle. Right, so we're going to go through the conduction system in a minute and what is exactly causing the contraction, but the right ventricle is going to fill. The pressure is going to build. This is going to shut the right AV valve, and right ventricular contraction is going to force open the pulmonary semilunar valves, and then the blood is going to enter into the pulmonary trunk, which branches into a right and left pulmonary artery, and the blood is carried to the lungs, and here carbon dioxide is released and oxygen is picked up. The blood is now oxygenated or oxygen rich, and it flows back into the left atrium of the heart through the 4 pulmonary veins. There are 2 on the right side and 2 on the left side. Don't confuse this with right and left side of the heart. It's just you have a right lung and a left lung, right? The blood is going to fill the left atrium. The pressure is going to start to increase. This is going to cause an opening of the left AV valve, also called the mitral or bicuspid valve. Right, pressure is then going to build up the left ventricle. that's going to close the left AV valve and force open the aortic semilunar valve. And so then the blood is going to enter into the aorta for distribution to the systemic circuit of the body. Systemic, just remember, like organ systems. So it's going to go to the stomach and the spleen and the liver, the kidneys, right, all the way down to the toes, way back up again. So you can kind of look at this as two circuits, actually three circuits, because we're going to talk about the coronary circulation, but the pulmonary circuit is just heart, lungs, heart again, right? So that's a fairly short circuit. The systemic circuit is heart, entire body, back again, right? And this is the reason why the left ventricle is more muscular than the right ventricle, because the blood needs to be forced out with enough pressure that it can make it all the way up to your brain, all the way to your fingertips, down to your toes. So it's a much longer distance to have to maintain pressure than just going to the lungs and coming back. So this is just summarizing like all, the different circuits that exist. It kind of put them all in together, but just listing the pulmonary circuit at the bottom, beginning with the pulmonary trunk, right, and ending with the pulmonary veins. So coronary circulation, or sometimes they call this the coronary circuit, right? So this is the series of vessels that supply blood to the myocardium of itself, and this is initiated through the right and left coronary arteries. If you cut off the aorta, right on the other side of the aortic semilunar valve, that's where these two arteries originate. So in lab, we're just calling the aorta, right, aorta. In theory, it goes up, arches, and down. So that's why it's saying the vessels arise from the ascending aorta. So here's a couple branches. In lab, we just looked at the left anterior descending artery that runs down between the two ventricles, right? So the left coronary artery branches into this left anterior descending artery, and the circumflex artery, because the heart's not flat, it's round, and the circumflex artery is going to kind of flip around the back sides. So this is going to supply blood to the left side of the heart. And then the right coronary artery is going to supply blood to the right. Oops, that went really, really, really fast. Right? There's some other arteries that are in there that we just don't really delve into. You can see, I think they're labeled on this image, they have some of the veins labeled, like they have those small cardiac vein, anterior cardiac vein. We're just going to kind of stick with the most major branches. So you can see right and left coronary artery, and it's either left anterior descending artery, which the easy way to remember that is LAD, right? Or it's also called the anterior interventricular artery. And then on the back, you can kind of see the circumflex artery there. You don't have to worry about identifying that on the heart model, right? And it's also showing some of the other veins, like the middle cardiac vein. Don't worry about that one. I just have it kind of underlined showing it, but don't worry about that. The test, the posterior interventricular artery. You would just tend to sing when there's nobody, when I think there's nobody around. All right, I will post the link to this on Blackboard. It's actually pretty interesting. So the left anterior descending artery, again, LAD's kind of easy to remember. This is sometimes referred to as the widowmaker because it's supplying blood to a variety of areas of the heart, but predominantly to the left ventricle, and it's left ventricular contraction that is allowing blood to enter into the systemic circuit. And so this is where blood is exiting the heart and like most critically going up to the brain. So if there's a blockage that occurs in this area, right, a coronary, or also known as a heart attack or a myocardial infarction, this is a massive heart attack because when blood supply is restricted to the brain, quickly lead to death. My slides are advancing by themselves. All right, so the cardiac veins, just worry about the term cardiac veins. They run parallel to the arteries, and we'll see this in lab also this week when we are looking at systemic arteries like the renal artery and the renal vein. The arteries and veins are often very parallel to each other, but we're just going to say we have cardiac veins, and they all empty together into the coronary sinus. And from the coronary sinus, this kind of, widened area, the blood then enters into the right atrium. Okay, slide behave yourself. See, now it's, there we go. Doesn't advance or advances twice. Right, we went over this in lab, the 3 branches off the aortic arch. I always remember they go kind of like alphabetically, so brachiocephalic, artery or trunk, either one is fine. This is the first branch, right? And this supplies blood to structures of the shoulder, upper extremities, right, and head on the right side of the body. Now, this is a little different than the models we have in the lab because you can see that the brachiocephalic artery does branch. We'll go over that this week in class, right? Our heart models kind of cut off there. Where this branching point exists, like this little Y, that gives rise to the right common carotid artery and the right subclavian artery. So the second branch, I know the labeling is a little weird, so it's the middle branch there. That's the left common carotid artery, so that's the second branch off the aortic arch, right? So this vessel kind of runs parallel to your trachea and transports blood to the left side of the neck and extends up into the head. The third branch is the left subclavian artery, and that transports blood to the left upper thorax. It's going to fairly quickly branch to form the axillary armpit, axillary artery, and then the brachial artery. Okay, so yes, it looks like I always say it looks really asymmetrical, but this image showing the branching of the brachiocephalic artery, right, that would give rise to the right common carotid artery and the right subclavian artery. Okay, switching gears a little bit, we're going to talk about the cardiac cycle, which consists of following events. Okay, while the atria, because you don't say atriums, while the atria contract, the ventricles are relaxed. And then the ventricles are relaxed and the atria, did I say it reversed? Okay, atria contract, ventricles are relaxed, then the ventricles contract, and then the atria are relaxed, right? So they both can't be contracting at the same time, remembering that the valves are opening due to pressure changes. So in theory, the AV valves kind of open first due to pressure change, then the atria contract. As a ventricular pressure builds up, the AV valves then shut, right? So they can't be contracting at the same time. But systole is a term that's used to define contraction. So while the atria are contracting or in systole, the ventricles are relaxed, and this is referred to as diastole. And I don't know, maybe a way to remember this is when you get your blood pressure done, the reading that you're giving, average is 120/80, is 120 systolic over 80 diastolic. Okay, this is actually referring to pressure in your large arteries that just exited the aorta, and the high number, the 120, is the pressure when the ventricles have contracted, and then the lower number is the pressure when the ventricles have relaxed. So blood pressure is specific just due to ventricular contraction, but you can also use the word systole when discussing the atria contracting, okay? So you're going to have atria contract, ventricles relax, and then there's like a little, brief point where everything is relaxed, and then the next cardiac cycle would start. And the way that this occurs is we kind of looked at cardiac muscle cells very briefly in chapter 5. Cardiac muscle cells, they're striated or striped, that's kind of their general appearance, and they're branched. They're branched and they form these networks. So the end of one cell is physically as well as electrochemically connected to another. And these junctions are called intercalated discs, okay? And then you have these fibers, right? So a muscle cell means the same thing as a muscle fiber, okay? So the two terms, my husband's using the microwave. That's what happens when you have to work at home. Dee, 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 dee. Okay, so you have these muscle cells or fibers that form a functional syncytium. That just means they are in sync with each other. They can function as a unit. So you have the atrial syncytium. All the atrial cardiac muscle cells are connected together, and then the ventricular syncytium. All the ventricular muscle cells function together. So the heart, and we'll get to this in a little bit, a couple minutes, but the heart generates its own intrinsic beat, okay? But it can be it can speed up due to release of the hormone norepinephrine, okay? Norepinephrine or like adrenaline. These are hormones that speed up heart contraction, right, to meet, in this case would be like a fight or flight response, or to meet your metabolic need, where acetylcholine is a hormone that decreases the heart rate, right? So it has its own steady rhythm, but sometimes it needs to speed up, and sometimes if you're just resting, right, it can slow down a little bit, right? So there's hormones. We'll kind of cover this a little bit more of the nervous system. There's hormones that act on the heart that have, they're a little slower acting, but they have a more long-term effect. And then there's neurotransmitters that can affect the heart rate. And they're not as long acting, but they have a much more rapid rate. And we don't want to go crazy, but sometimes something can be a neurotransmitter and act as a hormone. Yes. All right. So 99% of the heart consists of these heart muscle cells. And these heart muscle cells they're called contractile cells. So they contract, and they contract to propel the blood. So the other 1% is, and you do have the tissues that make up the valves and line the chambers. That's a little bit different. If you're looking at just the myocardium, they're about 1% are actually, I kind of consider them to be like the electrical wires. They conduct the electrical impulse through the heart. So they initiate a signal. They send a signal that allows for contraction to occur. So the cardiac conduction system, your SA node, sinoatrial node, this is a specialized mass of cardiac muscle cells which serves as the pacemaker. So if something happens and your SA node is damaged, they could actually put a pacemaker in place. And this fires the signals to initiate contraction about 70 to 80 times a minute at when you're at rest. Obviously, if you're exercising, your heart rate is going to need to elevate, right? From the SA node, the impulse that you can see kind of the little zigzag lines on the diagram spreads to the atrial septum. So once the signal is sent to one cardiac muscle cell, it can then spread to another muscle cell and then another muscle cell. So it's not like you have to have this wiring go through every cell. It goes to key areas, and then once the signal's received, it can be passed along. Right? So this was what causes atrial contraction to occur, and then it passes to the AV node, right? Atrial ventricular node. And what this does is it passes the signal to the AV bundle, and this causes a very, very, millisecond pause, right? Because you don't want the ventricles to start contracting until the atria have finished contracting. And this AV bundle is located in the intraatrial septum. So I know that we just mentioned the interventricular septum. So that's the wall of myocardium that is found between the right and left ventricle. There is also a septum between the two atria. So that's the interatrial septum. So from the AV bundle, the impulses passes down the interventricular septum. The AV bundle is also, the older name is a bundle of His, and it's not like his, hers. It's like the researcher that first, identified the structure. So it's just someone's last name. So you have AV node, AV bundle, and then the bundle branches. This is where the conduction system branches off to the right and left side, right? And so this is actually underneath the endocardium, the lining of the heart. And then the bundle fibers give rise to Purkinje fibers, which then spreads the impulses to the ventricular wall and the papillary muscle. So remember, the ventricles are different than the atrium, that they have the papillary muscles, and these contract to pull down, we did this in lab, to pull down on the chordae tendineae so that the AV valves stay shut and don't blow open and reverse direction when the ventricles contract, because ventricular contraction is going to be fairly forceful, okay, even on the right side. All right, I will post a link for beating hearts. Obviously, sometimes you have to put your age in or whatever, but the video shows that you can take a heart out of the human body, and if you connect it up to a blood supply that is being oxygenated, it'll keep beating on its own. And it beats on its own because the SA node is initiating that signal that's being spread to the AV node, the AV bundle, the bundle branches, and the Purkinje fibers. Okay, so this is, there goes my, see here, my grandfather clock going off. I like working at work, right? So yeah, if this is these heart in a box, they call it, it's kind of something that ideally is used if doing a heart transplant. So you watch on TV, there's someone who's a heart donor, you always see it's in a little cooler with ice, somebody jumps on a helicopter, takes it to where it needs to be put to the recipient. Ideally, if these individuals are not too far apart, is take the heart out of the donor and keep it beating, right? Keep it beating so that it can be put into the recipient. And it just has a better overall, survival rate's easier to get started if you have it, continue beating than just put it on ice. Yeah, I'll put a link for this too. This is like an APR video, and the APR videos they're good, But, since we only have a one semester class, we're just like really not able to go into as much detail as many of their videos demonstrate. Right? So this is just kind of summarizing the path of cardiac impulse. So like what happens if something happens and your SA node becomes damaged, right, and is not, functioning at a high enough rate, your AV node can also become like a secondary pacemaker. So there is some kind of contingency plans that are built into this. So an EKG, electrocardiogram, and I was like saying, well, like where'd you get the K from, right? So in German, they spell cardiogram with a K. That's just like the only reason why it's not ECG, but we still call it an EKG. And what this does is it measures the electrical activity of the heart. It measures the changes in electrical activity. It's not really a measurement of the strength of contraction. It's the electrical disturbances that are generated during heart contraction. So contraction, these impulses are actually electrical signals, right? And the human body consists, very high percentage of it is water, and water is a really good conductor of electricity. And so these electrical disturbances can be detected even on the outside of your body. So if you've ever gone for an EKG, they place electrodes in different areas on the surface of your body, and then they can get a reading, right? So the large peaks, we don't go into this in much detail at all, just to kind of show you what it is. But the large peaks are the disturbances that are shown by ventricular contraction, right, which is much stronger. So the first, if you look at diagram B, the first little peak is ventricular contraction, right? And then the big peak, the first peak is atrial contraction. The second peak is ventricular contraction, which kind of masks the electrical disturbance that is generated by atrial diastole or relaxation, right? So you kind of get a disturbance from contraction and electrical disturbance generated by relaxation. And where they show T, that's the difference that is being expressed when the ventricles relax. So, you can, it's fairly complicated. Any blockages, which could be due to like a heart attack or something like that, would show abnormalities in this peak. You can measure somebody's heart rate if you go from high peak to high peak. So there's a variety of, like flutters or other things like that can be detected, or AFib is another thing that can be picked up as abnormality on an EKG. It's called this, the onomatopoeia of heart sounds. So yeah, like, you go to a doctor for a checkup. The one thing they do is they always listen to your heart. And the heart sounds, they're not due to, there's not a sound that's generated when the valves close. But when the valves close, they cause vibrations in the heart tissue, and that's what's detected. So the heart sounds are often described as like the So the first sound, the lup, occurs as the ventricles contract and the AV valves close. And then the second heart sound, the dup, this occurs as the ventricles relax and the aortic and pulmonary semilunar valves close, right? And if you have a heart murmur, that is detected as abnormal sound. And so if some blood is like regurgitating, is flowing backwards, like for instance, the left AV valve is shutting, but some of the blood, if you have an abnormality you're born with, if you have a murmur, doesn't mean that you're unhealthy or anything like that. But it can be something you're born with. It's something that can be result of having some type of infection. But if you get like any type of reverse flow of blood's going on the opposite side of a valve, then that can be detected, by listening to the heart. So we mentioned the cardiac cycle, right? And you're going to have like alternating contraction and relaxation phases. So contraction, systole, relaxation being called diastole. And, average heart rate is about 75 beats per minute. The normal range is between 70 and 80. We don't really go into this in a lot of detail, but what's also kind of significant is like how much blood your left ventricle is ejecting per contraction. And people that do a lot of cardio, that are very athletic, their heart will work more efficiently. They'll actually eject more blood per ventricular contraction, which means their resting heart rate tends to be lower. We'll get to some in a minute. All right, so during atrial diastole, so remember, there aren't any valves going into the heart, only valves that are exiting the heart and between, right, the chambers. So the atria are going to start to fill. It's going to start to fill when the pressure in the atria becomes greater than that of the ventricles, right? The AV valves are going to open, right? And then the atria is going to contract. So it kind of passively fills, and then it fills due to contraction. So this is one thing, you hear this on commercials for different type of medications. They'll say like AFib, not generally life-threatening. So fibrillation is uncoordinated contraction. And when regard to the atria, it's filling passively anyway. So if the contraction is not as coordinated, that means some areas are starting to contract while others are still relaxing. It's not working as a symptom. You're still going to have blood that's going into the ventricles. However, ventricular fibrillation is life-threatening. That's where someone's defibbed. Like that's where they're shocked to try to have a unified signal reaching, the myocardium of the ventricles. Right, so you have ventricular contraction. As the pressure starts to build, as the contraction starts, that's going to shut the AV valves. As pressure increases, that's going to force the semilunar valves to open, right? And then the blood is going to be exiting on the right side to the pulmonary trunk and the left side to the aorta. So the atria and the ventricles are, kind of filling passively. We said that the blood is going to go from the atria to the ventricles. Okay, when the blood pressure is lower in the ventricles, the AV valves open, right? Then the atria will then contract. Okay, but the ventricles have already started to fill, right? So, all valves are going to remain closed until there's a greater pressure on one side of the valve, which is then going to cause it to open. Or in the case of the AV valves, the pressure drops in the ventricles, because you can see, those flaps are kind of flipping down. When the pressure in the ventricles become lower than that of the atria, then that set of valves is going to open. This is kind of interesting. It's like it can show on the diagram B, it shows you ventricular contraction. So you can see how it kind of like squeezes up from the bottom and then pushes the blood out. Okay, I'll post a link for this, right, the bottom of the video. I'll probably put this on an announcement. Right, so we said that average adult resting heart rate is, range is like 70 to 80, good average 75 beats per minute. You could have individuals again that are very athletic and that have a very low resting heart rate, so theirs might be around 60. I think it's like younger children, their heart rate is higher, right? But if your resting heart rate is above 100, then that's considered to be tachycardia. Tachycardia, I mean, this can be caused by, if you have a fever, if you have had a lot of like caffeine, if you have high blood pressure. There's some metabolic reasons, like if you have like hyperthyroidism, right? That could be sources of tachycardia. If your resting heart rate is lower than 60, then that's considered to be bradycardia. That can be caused by heart damage, like due to a heart attack, myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle. Just like having a fever could cause tachycardia, hypothermia would cause a decrease in heart rate. Another example metabolically would be hypothyroidism, right? So the amount of blood that's pumped at any one time needs to be adjusted to meet the current needs of your body. So your heart rate's going to be more elevated when you're exercising than when you're sitting at rest. So we'll kind of tie into this when we do the nervous system, but just to kind of give a brief explanation. So there's a division of your nervous system which is called the autonomic nervous system, or ANS. I always remember just if you remember automatic. So autonomic nervous system, right? And there's two divisions, and it's not necessarily that they work together, they innervate the same organs, but they kind of opposite effects. So the sympathetic division is kind of more involved in fight or flight responses. So these are nerve stimuli coming to the heart. Remember, I said the heart can be regulated by nerve impulses, neurotransmitters, which would be what's associated with nerve impulses or hormones. So sympathetic fight or flight response, that's going to increase the speed and strength of heart contractions. Parasympathetic is often referred to as rest and digest. Rest and digest. So these are responses that are going to decrease your heart rate. The cardiac regulatory center is found in the medulla oblongata. This is an area of the brain stem, and it maintains a balance between the sympathetic fight or flight and parasympathetic divisions, rest and digest, of the autonomic nervous system. The cardiac regulatory center receives information from baroreceptors. Baroreceptors, if you look at the word baro, it refers to barometer, so these are pressure receptors. So these are pressure receptors that are found in the aortic arch and in the coronary sinus that's sending information to the brain. Okay, a little bit more on that on the next slide. Impulses from the cerebrum may also affect the heart rate through emotions. So your heart rate may be elevated if you're like very excited, or something happens and you're very upset, where your heart rate may decrease if you're kind of just resting and you're very chill. We mentioned that increased body temperature increases the heart rate, same as a decreased body temperature would decrease your heart rate. So while there's a variety of factors that could cause your blood pressure to elevate, your body is going to always try to bring it back into the normal range. So elevated blood pressure is detected by these baroreceptors that are found in the aorta and also in the carotid sinus. So this is sending impulses to the medulla oblongata, and when elevated blood pressure is detected, the heart will decrease sympathetic stimulation and increase parasympathetic stimulation to try to, decrease your overall heart rate. It also will send signals to your blood vessels, causing them to dilate, which will drop your blood pressure. Great. So our Greek and Latin words, brady, which means slow, tachy, which means fast or rapid, cardi, and you can kind of pause this if it's going too fast, heart, myo, muscle. IA is used a lot, so that it means condition most often, and it can be, we said like tachycardia. It could be a transient condition. Sometimes it's an abnormal condition, but it means condition. Structure or tissue. Another one for pertaining to ac. And peri, around or surrounding. Right, so build the following terms. Condition of slow heart rate, bradycardia. Condition of rapid heart rate, because if you look at cardia, it just means heart, so it'd be like condition of slow heart, so also means rate. Tachycardia, and tissue that surrounds the heart, pericardium. Pertaining to the heart, cardiac. And the muscular layer of the heart is the myocardium.